TK Coleman, how are you doing today?
My brother, I treat myself well in season and out of season. So that question is going to be the same anytime you ask me, man. I'm blessed.
That's great.
Yeah.
Why don't you, in addition to uh, telling our audience what you do,
Yeah.
uh, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and where you grew up and what your childhood was like?
Yeah, man. Well, I heard a brother by the name of Shawn Thunder Wallace say many years ago that we are human beings, not human doings, that our actions are expressions of an underlying spirit that we bring to our work. So I'll start a little bit with who I am, and what makes my existence matter. And then we can talk a little bit about some of the ways that I express that in, work or whatever it may be. And you can fill in the gaps with any questions you got, man. First and foremost, man, the first and last thing I want you to know about me is that at this age and stage, I have reduced the totality of my life to a single proposition. And that is, I am here to convince as many people as I can that they have the permission and the power to be the predominant creative force in their own lives. There is nothing that I do that is not a direct effort to live that out, to embody that in my life. Now, that doesn't just take the form of like hustling, that takes the form of how I love, how I hang out with my friends, what I choose to study, how I play, how I laugh. But everything is an expression of that fundamental conviction that we are here to be creators. When I think about in the Bible, for instance, the first commandment that was given to human beings was to be fruitful and multiply. And I think that meant a lot more than just reproduce. I think that meant something along the lines of take this world that I have given you and to make more of it than it was when I first placed it under your stewardship. And so I am here to allow the world to feel the weight of who I am. I am here to make my mark, but not just for me individually. I'm here to influence others to do the same because I believe that life is most grand, life is most beautiful, and life is most enjoyable when we all live from a state of consciousness in which we embrace our personal power. And so when I say I try to convince as many people as I can of this, that begins with me. That doesn't begin with preaching. That doesn't begin with, grabbing anybody by the collar and saying, look, man, get yourself together. It doesn't begin with any self-righteous snobbery. It begins with me always looking for ways to expand and evolve beyond the limitations of my own thinking, me looking at ways for always tinkering with my own belief system, for always exposing my own assumptions and how those assumptions might be holding me back from being the best that I can be. And then the work that I do with others is an extension of the work that I do with myself. I'll segue into where I'm from. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. My dad is a pastor, and that's where all of that talk, all of that philosophy of life comes from. It's sourced in him. One of the first things he taught my brothers and I is that your number one priority in life should be to develop a sense of who you are and why you're here, and then live that out, because that's where your joy is going to come from. That's where your wealth is going to come from. And everything that we see that's wrong with the world, from people committing all kinds of evil and fraud to people feeling miserable and depressed and down and out, it's because of the emptiness that comes from a life that is not fully lived, from a life that is disconnected from a sense of purpose. And what's really cool about my pop is that he loved me and my brothers in the best way I could ever be loved. And that is, he didn't just give me his time. He didn't just give me validation, but he gave me an example of what it means to be a man that comes home every day saying, I'm so lucky to be doing what I do for a living. He gave me an example of the kind of energy you get to bring to your household when you are living your purpose, when you are living your mission. So anyway, man, I grew up in Chicago. I grew up in the Jordan heyday, the Chicago Bulls dynasty. I got a chance to experience those 6 championships. I know you're in Ohio, so congratulations on that one that LeBron gave. I know. No, I'm saying, man, like that's That's huge, right? That's huge. As a Cubs fan, we had to wait like 100 years to get one. You know what I mean? So that's everything, bro. I know how you guys feel 6 times. Anyway, I'm tripping right here. But hey, man, in terms of what I do, so professionally, like 6 years ago, lifelong friend of mine, Isaac Morehouse, and we co-founded a startup called Praxis, which is an apprenticeship program that helps aspiring young professionals launch their careers, teaching them, how to develop useful skills, how to create value in the marketplace, how to understand wealth as the kind of thing that is a reward for solving people's problems, how to think about knowledge and learning, not just in terms of what you know and how satisfied you feel with your intellectual understanding of things, but to think about knowledge in the context of value creation. How can I use this understanding of Aristotelian metaphysics or whatever it may be to make an impact on someone else's life by doing something that they care about enough to pay me for? All those types of things, man. And we saw a lot of gaps in higher education. We saw that there were a lot of people for whom that system simply isn't preferred, or it simply doesn't work for them. Or there are people who went through that system and maybe they didn't learn the skills they needed to be all that they wanted to be in their careers. And so instead of sitting back and waiting on reform or hoping that the right guy gets in the office to change things, we decided to be creative, man. We decided to be the change we want to see in the world. We decided to criticize by creating. So we started that up 6 years ago, spent the last 6 years of my life being the education director for that program, doing a lot of curriculum development, doing a lot of coaching, helping participants get placed at startups to do apprenticeships. And concurrently with that, I've been an adjunct faculty member at the Foundation for Economic Education, doing a lot of workshops and seminars for high school and college students where we teach them the economic way of thinking, entrepreneurial literacy, and how to apply that stuff to everyday life. And about a little over a year ago, I stepped on as a director at FEE. And so I'm now the director of entrepreneurial education. And I host a project called Revolution of One, where I talk a lot about the change that begins with the individual. One of the things I talk about a lot there is that I'm not just on a mission to create a society in which everyone feels free, but I'm interested in creating individuals who can figure out how to be free in any kind of society. And we can talk a little bit more about that line of thinking. But I have a podcast called Revolution of One. I got a video series that I produce. I do, a lot of coaching, a lot of workshops and things along those lines. And more specifically, at this stage of my career, I'm more passionate than anything else about Black dreams. The dreams that keep me awake at night are the deferred dreams, the delayed dreams, the denied dreams of young people of color. And I will never turn away anybody that God sends to me. If I have something to offer another human being, irrespective of their race, their color, their creed, I'm going to do whatever I can to add value to their life. But if you want to know who I lose sleep over, there's only one group I'm losing sleep over at this stage. It's young Black folks. And so I'm focusing a lot of my energy in, on those communities of people who don't have a lot of role models, who don't have a lot of examples of people who look like them, of people who come from the places they come from, that can give them a reason to believe in their own possibilities. So, man, that's what I'm all about, bro.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of the arts in your upbringing, in your formation, as a creative?
Yeah, man. So, I grew up in the church, and the church is like, 99%, the Black church is 99% theater. It's 99% musical theater. And even if you say, oh, no, you ought to give a higher percentage to preaching, that's part of the musical theater. You can't even preach in a Black church, man, unless you are tuning up, But no, man, my family, so I have a brother, Lamar, who sings a lot and just filled the house with music. We couldn't listen to secular music growing up, but he would smuggle in all the jazz and R&B, and he would smuggle in all the hip hop. And as kids, man, like that's all we did, like besides play ball. is we would listen to music and we would try to like imitate, you know, what a lot of our favorite artists were. I mean, when you met me back in the day, you knew about just my love for the two Bs, Boys to Men and Brian McKnight, man. Just walking around trying to hit those licks all day long. I fell in love with theater when I went to high school. Me and a buddy of mine, we tried out for a play as kind of a joke. And the joke turned out to be on us because we made it. And I fell in love with it, man. When I went to my first play rehearsal, I was like, whoa, whatever this is, I want to do this for the rest of my life. The sense of community and collaboration and creativity that came from that world of theater and musical theater was unrivaled by anything I had ever experienced. It taught me that sacred art of moving an idea from concept to completion, of taking a vision and through connecting with other human beings and just taking risk, how you can bring a vision into fruition. Like that, you know, that shaped so much in my life. I mean, that set the template, the roadmap for everything. So I did theater all throughout high school. And I got a theater scholarship to Western Michigan University, which is where you and I met each other. And I did theater there. And it was actually, it wasn't until a crisis of faith in maybe my sophomore year that resulted in me finding my home in philosophy that I kind of left the theater academically. But even then, I would always come back and do plays. I did a lot of local community theater, a lot of stage managing, did it after college and so forth. And I even look at a lot of what I do today, even though it's more entrepreneurial and philosophical. You know, I'm doing a lot of media production. Even when it comes to curriculum development, I'm not looking for someone to give me a map. I am literally making up my own map. I am not, you know, competing with things that already exist. I'm bringing things into existence that have not yet been. And so that sort of creative mindset, that concept of work as art remains with me. And I'm of the belief that we are no longer in an age where we can afford to make the distinction between art and non-art. It's still useful for academic purposes. It's still useful when you go to the library or to Barnes and Noble, right? You need to have categories and sections, however arbitrary, so that if you're looking for a book on painting or graphic design, you're not confused by going to the section on cooking. So yeah, labels are useful, but in terms of in terms of how we engage and experience reality, I don't think we can afford to look at anything we do as something that is non-art. I think that distinction must die in order for our species to survive and thrive in the world that is emerging before our very eyes.
Yeah, you know, it's very interesting. The whole so you in particular, you could have been an actor as a career. You're one of the more one of the most talented actors that I've seen. You know, I remember when we were at Western, going to a couple of the productions that you were involved in, and I think also you're so clear of thought and articulate. I don't think you have misspoken yet in this interview.
Oh man,
You're
we got a
so
lot of time to go, brother.
yeah, yeah. I'm just I'm saying that obviously your upbringing, your study in philosophy, your musical musical theater background, all of that seems like it was tailor made to put you where you are right now and doing the kinds of things that you do. When I watch your videos, they're so well conceived and executed. You know, you wouldn't have been able to, in my mind, you wouldn't have been able to find a better person to act the roles in those. So
I appreciate
so
that, man.
yeah, yeah. So I want to commend you for that. And as long as I've known you, and the intensely deep spiritually deep, philosophically deep conversations that we've had. 3 in the morning in the Burnhams.
I
Uh,
miss those, man. I miss those.
yeah, yeah.
My
Uh,
wife won't let me have those today.
yeah, I don't think my wife will let me have those either. So, um, but anyhow, you have some interesting views, um, and I think I have an interesting angle on the same views because I think we approach it from a different angle, um, and that is, uh, I mean, there's been some controversy with respect to certain things that you've said about allowing people not to feel like college is their only option. Like if they don't go to college, you know, that doesn't mean that you're some kind of failure, or if you have questions about school, taking some time to actually figure out what it is that you're trying to do so you're not wasting a bunch of money, you know. And then I think some of your criticisms of some of the things that people learn and don't learn when they're in college. Um, and that's an angle. Of course, both you and I have college degrees. That's where we met. Um, but I think both you and I think, could think of probably dozens of things that we wish we would have learned when we were in school. That basically our institutions of higher learning have just decided that we're not going to offer that, and they just kind of let the students up to their own devices after they finish. In particular, with respect to uh, there are certain degree programs which are married to the industry.
Mhm.
Um, I'm in the School of Music. I'm a music professor, so music ed, for instance, there seems to be a pretty direct connection between the music ed curriculum and actual job placement. Ohio State, for instance, has close to 100% placement rate, and uh, so that's positive. But most of the degrees that universities offer do not have that kind of hand in glove, kind of relationship, and it makes it really, really challenging to get employment when there's thousands of people that just graduated with the same degree that you have, and you have no angle on employment. Even stuff like learning how to interview well. That's not something anybody talked to me about. So I'm curious as to some of your thoughts on this.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, I love to discuss this stuff. Well, as I consistently do, and I say this to anyone who feels slightly tempted to label me as anti-college, as I consistently do, as I flawlessly do, when I am ever on any kind of interview and given the opportunity to talk about my position on college, I will begin with an official, formal, explicitly stated disclaimer that I am not anti-college. I have no issues with people who say, TK, I've thought this through. I think college is the best choice for me, and I would like to go, and it brings me fulfillment. Hands off. I got nothing to say to you about it, right? Like, I support your dreams as much as I support anybody else's. I don't have some special bias against people who go to college. I also acknowledge that there are some careers where it is illegal. And we can talk about a separate criticism of that, but that's not a criticism towards people who go to college. There are some careers where it is illegal to practice them in this country unless you have the requisite degree. And I fully acknowledge that. And I fully acknowledge that there are people who are needed in those careers, and you've got to work within the system that we have. And again, I have no criticism of that. I also will go further than many college professors, and even maybe what you might have just said. I got no problem with somebody spending $200,000 on a degree that's not going to make them any money, because after all, it's your money. You wouldn't be the first person to use your money on something that I would never do with that money. Am I going to start harassing the guy that pays $300 for a Justin Bieber concert ticket just because I think it's a waste of time? Not at all. You have the right to do whatever you want to do with your money, and I will be your biggest fan. Even if I disagree with how you spend it, I'll fight for your right to use it freely, right? None of that is my problem. And in fact, I find it quite interesting that whenever I talk about the importance of having alternatives to college, it's always requested of me or demanded of me that I take the time to give such a disclaimer, or that I take the time to make sure that the people who go to college know that I think it's okay for them as long as, you know, they thought it through or whatever it may be. Because that's sort of a misframing of the actual public discourse that happens. In the real world, it is not the case that there is some mass movement to make people feel stupid for going to college. In the real world, people are conditioned to think of college as the next step from the moment they begin school. And I understand that in some communities, it's harder to get into college, it's harder to have options and so forth. But every pastor, every other celebrity, every other guidance counselor, every other uncle, every other aunt, every other teacher is constantly reinforcing the message that if you want to be successful, go to college. But what happens if you decide that you want to be one of the black sheep for whom college is not a right fit? What happens there? I'll give you an example of what happens. I'll use interracial dating or interracial marriage because I'm in an interracial marriage. I'll use an example here that I think captures the way I see the situation. If you were to take a survey and go around asking people if they thought it was okay for two people of different races to marry each other, you would get a very predictable response from the overwhelming majority of people. You want to tell me what that predictable response is? If you took a survey and people gave their answers in public, if they thought interracial dating was okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Yeah, most people would say, well, what is this, man? This ain't the 1960s, right? Like, as long as two people love each other, as long as they understand the implications involved and so forth, hey, I mean, love who you want to love. In fact, if you dare to even ask that question, people will look at you as if you were kind of crazy for thinking that we need to ask it. This is 2020, bro. It's not 1960, right? So that's pretty predictable. So it seems at the level of public discourse, we're sufficiently evolved. Like, everybody just accepts that the only thing that matters is love, not race. But now I have a separate question for you. Suppose you pick a specific individual. We're no longer having the discussion philosophically in the abstract now. Suppose you pick a specific individual, and that individual comes home one day and says, hey, mom, dad, I'm dating a black, Asian, whatever guy, girl. How do you think that conversation's gonna go? Do you think the majority of those conversations are gonna be like, hey, as long as you guys love each other, no problem here? Go talk to people that have actually been in these relationships. And it's kind of different. You wanna tell me how that conversation looks a little different?
I think because of the specific knowledge of the individuals involved, I think there's probably more resistance.
Yeah, it's always different when it's your son, when it's your daughter, right? I mean, if you're asking me my philosophical views on, and we can throw other things into this too. If you ask for my philosophical views on, you know, sexual orientation or racial preference in dating, I get to be pretty detached and abstract and just sort of talk about things in a very theoretical, risk-free sense. There's no cost to anything I say. But if it's my son, if it's my daughter that comes home, says, Dad, I'm an X. Dad, I'm dating a Y. Well, now I've got some skin in the game. Now my reputation could be affected by this. Now I could be dragged into some complex conversations and situations that I never asked to be a part of. And I may begin to express concerns. I may begin to drill you and interrogate you or be concerned about you in a way that I wouldn't if somebody did kind of like the status quo thing. So how does this apply to college? I don't want to get lost. How does this apply to college? I think it's easy. The battle and debate is already over if you go around asking people, hey, do you think there's one and only one right way to educate people? No one's going to be the one to say yes to that, right? No one's going to be that guy. We all know the social consequences of being that guy. Everyone's going to say, of course, I've seen the TED Talks. Of course, there's more than one way to educate a person. Of course. Do you think there is at least one person in the universe for whom college is not the best choice? Of course. Who's going to be that guy to say no to that? But when it's your son and it's your daughter, well, now it's a little scary, because I believe in geniuses in theory, but it's a lot more risky to believe my kid's that genius. I believe it's okay for Steve Jobs, but it's a lot more risky to believe that that's my kid. And where I come at this conversation is not at a theoretical level. I come at this conversation from having actually coached and worked with the very kids that opt out of college. And I'm the one who has to talk to their parents. My son wants to drop out of college. My daughter wants to drop out of college. And I'm very familiar with the kinds of questions they ask, the kinds of things they say to their kids. And I don't say this in some bitter or judgmental way, but I do think that we deceive ourselves if we believe that the conversations are the same for both parties. The pressure, I will tell you this, if you opt out of college, the pressure on you to be like Steve Jobs or bust is unreal in this day and time, you know, because at the first sign of failure or stress or things not working, the first thing that's going to get whipped out on you is, should have went to college. If you go to college, on the other hand, and you get your liberal arts degree, you take 6 years to graduate, you get your liberal arts degree, and then you end up working at Starbucks, no hate on that, no hate on that. No one's going to be like, whoa, what's going on? They'll be like, the economy's tough. Keep trying, keep pushing yourself. You know, it takes a little while. You know what I mean? No one's going to use that as an attack on your character. On the other hand, if you got that same problem, you opt out of college and, you know, you're working at Starbucks in 3 years. Oh, like that's because you didn't go to college. And so a lot of people who opt out of college, even though they might be doing constructive things, even though they might, you know within their heart and soul that college isn't right for them, they have this tremendous amount of stress and pressure to be way more successful than everybody else because of the kind of interrogation. You know, I often say that because I've coached a lot of opt-outs, you know, on how to have conversations with their parents and their family about their decision to not go to college. And I often say that it's not my job to protect them from those tough questions. I think if you really have solid beliefs, then they should be able to stand the test of scrutiny. So if you're someone who's skeptical of, opting out of college, have at it. I want you to be the person to like drill a lot of the kids I work with, because they need that. They need that to get through life. So that's not my problem. My problem is those same people just kind of disappear when it comes to applying that same scrutiny to the ones who go to college. Every year you get on Facebook and you'll see someone is like, hey, just get accepted into North Carolina. Does anyone say, yeah, but what are you majoring in? Is anyone going to be that jerk? No one's going to be that guy. Is anyone going to be the guy that's like, yeah, well, but what if the thing that you get a degree in doesn't work out? What if you don't get a job right away? No one says anything other than congratulations. We're already celebrating a success. We're already celebrating. You just got into the game, right? And we're celebrating. On the other hand, you cannot get that kind of love, man, by going on Facebook and being like, hey, I decided that college isn't the right fit for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, go to this apprenticeship program, or I'm going to go to Lambda school, or I'm going to teach myself how to code online, or I'm going to move to New York and do this thing out here. You might get some really close, loyal, artistic, crazy, weird, entrepreneurial friends that are like, do you, baby? But you're definitely going to get a few concerns. You're definitely going to get a little bit of that. And I don't think that's unfair. I think there's a very good explanation for why that is, that we don't have to be like upset about. But I say all that because the vantage point from which I talk about this topic is influenced by the fact that my work has not been with the 99. My work has been with the lost sheep. And the way that you have to communicate to the lost sheep is very different when you're communicating to the 99. Okay, so if you go to college, I'm gonna let you know that, you should do you, and I have no problem with that, but I don't feel the need to be out there as an advocate telling people who wanna go to college that their decision is validated, because the world you live in, The economic infrastructure that you are a part of is constantly validating and reinforcing that choice. I'm interested in the people that are scaring their family and friends and dealing with the stress of that every single day. Those are the people that interest me. Those are the people that I've been wanting to work with. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I have a pretty controversial view on education, in that I don't think that education is a right. I don't think it should be a right. Well, we've made it a right through 12th grade, but I don't actually think it is, or should be, because a lot of the issues that we have in education with behavior problems and with let's just talk through about K through 12. A lot of the education issues that we have, behavior issues that we have, are, you can't put someone that does not want to learn, is not interested in what's going on in the classroom, is, throwing stuff around the room, is being disrespectful to the teacher, next to students that really want to learn and find a good outcome for the person that wants to learn. And then on the other side of that, I'm not suggesting that we throw away the kids with behavior issues, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest that maybe our school should be offering different kinds of study, more trade, trade offerings. I know some schools offer carpentry and plumbing, and I know some schools offer that, career centers kind of thing. But I think we need more of that, because those skills are valuable skills to have. You can finish high school and you can go right into employment with those jobs. And a lot of kids, a lot of people, the only reason that they go to college is because it's the socially accepted thing to do. It's the next step. It's as if college is the new high school.
And if I could just insert one more thing in there, it's not only socially acceptable in the positive sense, but having worked with people who make that actual decision, and here's my interracial dating analogy coming in again, it's socially costly in a negative sense.
Right.
Right. It's to make the decision to opt out of college comes with a risk of offending or alienating people who would otherwise like you or be comfortable with you, that you simply won't have to deal with if you go to college. That's huge.
Now, it's interesting because, I take your point about, if this is your kid that's deciding to opt out, how are you going to feel about it? Even if philosophically I'm talking all this education is not right and blah, blah, blah. I'm talking all that language now. But what am I going to think when my son, who's 6 now, when he decides he doesn't want to go to college? How am I going to think about it? And I take that. And to that, I would say, I think it's important not to make the exception the rule. I think often, and this is not just in this situation, but often people that are already decided on a particular course of action will use examples of folks that are making a similar decision that they want to justify. And but it's so out of balance with reality. Like you used the example of Steve Jobs. Like, I don't think it would be a good argument for someone to say, well, I'm not going to college. Steve Jobs didn't go to college. Look at how successful he was. That's out of balance with.
I'm gonna play basketball. LeBron James played basketball. It worked out pretty well for him.
Right. And so I think that there is some balance to be had with this whole conversation.
Can I respond to that though?
Yeah, go ahead.
Two things very quickly. So number one, when I bring up the Steve Jobs concern, I bring it up not as a justification for the decision
Right,
to
right, right.
opt out.
And I understand that, by the way.
Yeah,
But go ahead.
but as a critique of a very common fallacy that arbitrarily and unfairly defines success for college opt-outs as Steve Jobs. If you go to college, there's a wide range of things you can do indeed to be successful. But if you opt out, it's kind of like Mark Zuckerberg or bust, right?
Right,
Like
right.
and that's just an expression of the kind of unfair standard that's applied to a lot of people who opt out of college, or at least a lot of the pressure they feel from things that are said to them. A second, more fundamental thing I will say, though, and this doesn't speak to the college debate, but it speaks to the way we approach education altogether. I actually do squirm when we say things like everybody can't be Steve Jobs. I kind of squirm there because there is a sense in which that is clearly true. Everybody isn't going to be the founder of a tech startup. Everybody isn't going to, succeed at starting a business or something along those lines. But I do reject the idea that there is such a thing as non-genius. In the same way that I'm not entirely comfortable with the distinction between art and non-art, I'm also not entirely comfortable with the distinction between genius and non-genius. I think there is a sense in which we all can be Steve Jobs, and that is if we find our own unique way of bringing interestingness to something. I believe that we all have proclivities, that we all have priorities, preferences, and passions, which if we can just be provided with environments that allow us to experiment with those things, we can embark on a process of discovery that would allow us to live uncommonly creative lives, and that would lead to unprecedented wealth in the marketplace as well. Now, I think that does sound unbelievable. I'm aware that I'm saying something that probably sounds like, a conspiracy theory, but I think it's only unbelievable because the way in which the education system is set up today makes it artificially difficult to produce examples of what it is I'm talking about. Because at a very early age and stage, the kind of thinking, the kind of exploring that needs to be done to tap into this power is kind of cut off. And this goes to what you were saying about the need for more diversity, variety in education.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I don't think that was the intention of creating these education systems is to stifle creativity. It was likely to give the sort of the infrastructure, the basic fundamentals to be able to unlock that creativity and potential. But we also know that the longer that things exist in a particular state, the more crystallized they become, and the less that they actually facilitate actual genius, actual creative kind of thoughts. I even think about how this sort of manifests in my own teaching, in my own studio, my own applied lesson studio. Now, I intentionally have tried to set things up in such a way that do not attempt to transform my students into copies of me. But there are a lot of applied instructors, professors that is their goal. All of them must play the same equipment, same brand of instrument, the same mouthpiece, the same reeds, the same ligature, the same, and must practice all of the same material, play all the same pieces, emulate, all aspects of, and so you end up with a bunch of carbon copies of a particular, influential teacher. And only seldom do you through that do you find people that actually sound like themselves.
Mm,
You know,
mm,
uh, now there's a plus and a minus to that because the plus is that I think by uh, forcing yourself to have to uh, personify or to to sound like somebody else, you have to learn certain skills that you weren't capable of doing. But only if you're using that as a means to the ultimate end of sounding like yourself and being yourself is it actually productive. I think what happens is we get lost. We get to a certain point and we sound like something like someone else, or our all of our thought process has been totally sort of the creativity has been trained out of it. But that was never the purpose of the
mm.
process. The purpose of the process was to gain skills that this rigor is going to impart, and then you can use those resources any way you want to use them. It's to unlock your own identity. I just think that there aren't that many examples um, uh, of that occurring in our current percentage wise. So I mean, there's folks that are still innovating and still doing things that went through the educational system, and I like that. I went through the educational system. Hopefully I don't just sound like my teachers or something. But but then of course that was different too, because my dad was my teacher when I was growing up, and he had a particular angle on that. He was concerned about uh, you know my identity and my individualism, and he wanted to preserve that. And so even before I went to college, I had that, so a great gift from him. And I was able to maintain that throughout. And so I basically looked at college as a ways to acquire the skills that I wanted to do something that I had already knew I wanted to do. I think to your point, if you're going to college and you have no idea of what you want to do at all, and you're just going to spend a lot of money and just basically just be further confused by the education process, maybe it's not a good idea for you right now to go to college. Maybe you should spend some time figuring out what it is that you want to do. Now, maybe the argument against that is, well, that's what happens to a lot of college students in their first couple years. They keep changing their degrees until they figure out what they want to do. It seems expensive, an expensive approach to doing that. Uh,
Yeah, and this is why I think it's very fair to talk about money. And I mean, no one wants to say, or wants people like me to say it's a business, and I'm fine with that, because a rose by any other name, right? Like, put whatever label you want to put on it, but let's be clear on the fact that it's an institution that charges for its services. Okay, now I'm all about you people writing a paycheck to anyone they want to teach them whatever they want to learn. I'm all about that. If you got the money and you want to write a check to somebody for $20,000 to just teach you about ants, that's cool with me. It's your money again, right? But a lot of people have a problem with asking the question, all right, how are you going to use that information in the marketplace to create wealth to provide for you and your family? That seems so unfair and so Scrooge-like to just, how are you gonna, it seems like the kind of person that would make me really mad when I was in college, right? But if it's unfair to talk about money there, why is it fair to talk about money when it comes time for you to pay the bill? Because people can say whatever they want about the intrinsic value of knowledge, but they're not giving it to you for free. People can talk all they want about knowledge being priceless, but they're not giving it to you for free. You're paying for it. And that's okay. I got no criticisms of paying for knowledge. I'm all about that. I pay for every one of these books, and they're worth it for me. But if you are paying for this knowledge, and and there's going to come a point in the future where someone says, hey, no excuses, pay the bills, no excuses, pay the tab. Then it ought to at least be encouraged somewhat for people to think about the economic ramifications of the decision, right? If I'm going to pay six figures for a degree in whatever, it's not entirely crazy to think about what the options are for how I can translate that knowledge into value creation that allows me to at least be able to pay back what I borrowed to pay from it. TK, but everything isn't about money. I agree. But the people who are charging you a price tag for that knowledge, they don't care about that idealistic philosophy. And I agree, everything isn't about money. But I mean, we can get online and learn a bunch of stuff, right? You can go buy some books and for much cheaper, learn a bunch of stuff. So if you're paying a premium for a product and you're calling that an investment, when has it ever become unfair to ask people to think critically about the return they're getting on their investment? Oh, I'm buying stocks. Well, what's the return you plan to get on those investments? Oh, I'm starting a business. What's the return you plan on getting on that investment? That's not fair. That's not fair. We don't do that in any other arena where we dare to invoke the word investment, but we do it all the time when it comes to college. I believe the whole game would change if we just owned our language and said, let's call education what it is, y'all. It's an investment. We spend a lot of money, even if it ain't coming out of your pocket. We spend a lot of money, making it possible for people to accumulate knowledge with the hope that they'll be able to go out into the world and be able to make their way in the world. And if we ask it the same kinds of questions we ask about other investments, I think it would force us to improve in a lot of ways, But I really think my biggest challenge with the way we approach education is a lot of the debates center around finding the way or a way that we kind of force on everybody, right? It's kind of like the Common Core debates. It's, why does this debate even exist? We should live in a world where if that's the way some people want to learn, then they can learn that way. And if people prefer to learn another way, they can opt out of that, right? We should live in that kind of world. In the same way that in the world of fitness, you have competition, you have variety, and we're all free to be snobs and self-righteously judge each other's different ways of working out. And yet we still have our options, So guys on their way to the gym can walk past a yoga studio and make fun of all the yoga moms who work out that way. And then they can go to the gym and they can do deadlifting, and everybody's free. Everybody's working out in the way that they want to. And even though they're free to criticize each other, they're free to do it how they want to do. There is no legislation that says, no, fitness needs more deadlifting and everybody's going to do a little bit of deadlifting every day. Like we need that perspective in education. We need more competition and less debate about what's the one right way for everyone.
Yes. We could talk about this for a long time, and I'm going to have you back to
Yeah, man.
To continue that part of the discussion. But I do want to ask you just a couple more questions. So what has been maybe the most amazing or touching moment or experience that you've had? Or a few of them. And you have a range. Those you could itemize. You have a range of of things you could discuss.
I love how you saw me struggling with the question, and rather than making it easier, you knew that my problem was that I needed it to be harder. Like, okay, brother, give me 6 experiences.
Oh, right.
I'm sorry, brother. Don't give me 1. Give me 18. Oh,
Yeah.
so do we want amazing and touching? Do we want transforming? Do we want like anything you in particular you're looking for, or just like?
No, I think just kind of big moments. I think, for me, a big moment was going on tour with the Count Basie Orchestra.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was a big moment for me. Um, it wasn't necessarily transformative,
hmm
um, because the reason that they called me was because the transformation necessary to be able to do that gig had already taken place,
mm,
so to speak.
mm,
Um, so it was a validation,
mm.
of all the years of work and everything, and or like finishing my doctorate was a big moment for me. Um,
Yeah,
so just different, events or moments or whatever.
yeah, man. I would say that time that I auditioned for American Idol. So I was in grad school at this time, studying philosophy. And you know me, you know what it was like back in the day, just like constantly tortured about the tension between should I do this or should I do that. I have many different loves, and I can never just stay in one place because I have all these different things that I love. And I'm in grad school, things are going well, and Paige Kennedy, who still lives in LA, working actor at that time, he's like all up in my ear. He's calling me like, "Yo, man, the American Idol auditions are gonna be in Detroit, dude. You gotta go do this, man. Like, this is in your heart. You always walking around singing, like, come on, man, you got to do this." And I was like, "Nah, man, nah." I missed the Detroit audition, and then he called me up again and was like, "Yo, there's gonna be another one in San Jose. I will pay for your flight ticket. Like, I believe in you. I believe that you need this. The world needs to see what I see. Come on, man. Like, it's got your name written all over it." And I remember just kind of toiling with it, like, oh, this just sounds like an unwanted interruption of life. This is like terrible timing. I'm finally like becoming more of that stable type of dude that's not always, being eccentric and unpredictable, with chasing after this or that dream. Bad timing. And I remember going to my philosophy professors and just kind of asking them what they thought and stuff like that. And none of them were haters. They can easily sound like this by what I'm about to say, but they were all like cool, non-haters. But they all kind of had the perspective of like, man, you're doing really good here with the philosophy thing. You know what I mean? Like, opportunities like that, they come and they go, but I think you have something good going for yourself here, and maybe you should stay on this path, and I was on that path to, be a professor, that sort of thing. And I remember walking down Dunbar Hall, which is where the philosophy department's offices were, and there was a professor by the name of Sylvia Culp. I never took a class with her, never even saw her before. I knew her name from the catalog because every time we registered for courses and so forth. And her door was always closed. It was like at the end of the hall, always closed. This day it was open, and she was in there. And she was the only woman in the department. And I thought to myself, let me see what she's got to say. And I knocked on her door, and I told her, like, hey, I got this dilemma. I just love to get some of your perspective on it. And she was like, sure, have a seat. And we started talking, and I broke down the situation to her. And she said this to me. She said, this world already has enough philosophers who are teaching the next generation of kids without knowing what it's like to follow their own dreams. We don't need any more of those people. We don't need any more of those people trying to influence the worldview of our young people if they don't know what it's like to get answers to the questions in their own hearts. She says, there's no expiration date on this. You ever want to come back to philosophy? You can come back to this anytime. And when you're older and you get experience, you'll probably be better at it anyway. And she talked about Wittgenstein and other people and all the cool things that they did that made them better philosophers. And she said, go get your questions answered. Go get your questions answered. And I was like, I'm going to do this, man. I'm going to go get my questions answered. And so I remember, telling I had a friend who was in the grad department at philosophy, and I told him about it. He was like, man, you're crazy as hell. He was like, but I am going to help you prepare for it. He says, this is what we're going to do, man. We're going to go around on campus, and we're going to stop every girl, man. And we're going to just like have you sing for them, because you gotta have like guts, man. You gotta be able to sing in front of anybody. You gotta get rid of all that fear. That's what we're gonna do. And I was like, all right, man, let's go. Right? So we're walking around campus, and on this day of all days, we're not running into any girls, man. And there are these three tall brothers walking down campus. And my guy is like, all right, we're going to sing for these guys. He runs up to these dudes. He's like, hey, my boy is auditioning for American Idol. He's like, can he sing for y'all? And the guys looked at each other like, they looked at me. And one dude leaned back and he was like, do your thing, man. Do your thing. He looked so unimpressed. And I sung Back at One by Brian McKnight. By the time I was halfway through the verse, they was like, you know, and when I finished singing, one of the guys leaned forward and was like, he gave me some dap. He was like, hey, do that thing, bruh. Do that thing. And I was like, oh man. And my courage got worked up. And so we just started going across campus to everybody. Over a couple of like days, I must have sang for like 30 people. And I just like lost all my fear at this point. I was completely shameless. I even stopped some people and they were like, no, not interested, and walked off. And I didn't even care, man. I was just bold at this point. So I went to Rocket Star Cafe like a couple of days before my flight. And I walked into Rocket Star Cafe, which was this busy coffee shop that, you know, everybody used to hang out on campus. I was so bold. I pulled out, you know, a chair, stepped onto it. And I said, everybody, can I have your attention? Everybody in there, the workers, the people sitting down, they turned to me like, what is up with this dude? And I said, check it out. I'm getting ready to get on a plane and go to California. I'll be auditioning for American Idol, blah, 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 blah. I told them my story. And I said, I want to sing for y'all. And it was like, go for it. And I sang, and that whole place just like erupted in applause. They were like, go, 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 go. And I felt like this is my destiny, man. Like all of the signs are pointing to this is my destiny. I'm going to American Idol and I'm going to win. And I went there and I lost. I went there and I didn't even make the show. But I could tell that story in a more detailed way. There were a lot of really cool aspects of what it was like to audition for the show. But I remember the moment when I went up to sing before the producers. And one of the things they explain to everybody is, you know, they're going to point you one way, left, or they're going to point you right. If they point you to the right, then that's when you go sing for the next, you know, set of producers. There are levels to this thing. And if they point you to the left, like that's the exit door. And you got to be interestingly good or interestingly bad. If you are good, not interesting, that's not really American Idol material. If you are bad, not comically so, it's not really good material. I sang, and I got the door to the left, man. I got the door to the left. And that crushed me. It crushed me, but at the same time, it enlivened me because I had so much fear about auditioning for American Idol. When my friend first proposed that to me, it seemed like this big dramatic thing for which so many tough questions had to be answered. Well, how will I pay for this? Or what song will I sing? And what, you know, it just seems so complex. And through the process of having that initial conversation and going out there and auditioning, I realized that fear as a theoretical concept is far more intimidating and dangerous than it is as a lived experience. When you are thinking about your dreams, oh my gosh, fear is this great dragon that will slay you when you take the first step. But when you actually follow your dreams, you realize that fear is just kind of like, oh yeah, fear is kind of like snow. It's kind of like a thunderstorm. It's a part of life. It's this thing that you walk through, that you move through, but it doesn't have to destroy you. It can make you stronger. And I think the most important thing I realized from that experience is that, yes, you should follow your dreams. Not because when you wish upon a star, it makes no difference who you are. Not because the universe is such a wonderful place that when you follow your dreams, you're always gonna get a yes. But you should follow your dreams because on the other side of your fear is a superior version of self. There is a version of you that is wiser than the dude that's sitting in front of me. There's a version of you that's funnier than the dude that's sitting in front of you. That's sitting in front of me. That's better in every single way. And you don't get to become that dude until you face your fears and step through them and follow your dreams. And so the pearl of great price is not a dream fulfilled, but a self-actualized. And when I went after that dream, I failed. I didn't get what I wanted, but I realized that I became a much better version of myself, and my life was so much better as a result of that. And the possibilities that were unlocked in my mind changed the path I was on forever. I never went back to grad school, dude. Like, after that experience, I was just like, whatever this is, I want more. I want more failure. I want more adventure. I want more excitement. I want more risk. I want more of this. And that's what set the stage for the entrepreneurial path that I would later take. And I could have never known that had I not taken that risk and failed.
That's a great story, man. That's a great story. So I'm going to ask you about some tweets that you did.
Yeah.
So one of them is don't underestimate the value of your non-reactive interests. Some of our most valuable solutions and inventions come from processes of discovery that are not aimed at fixing the most urgent problems or the most urgent problem. The power of curiosity doesn't expire during a crisis. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. One of my guiding principles in life is a quote by Howard Thurman where he says, ask not yourself what the world needs, but rather what makes you come alive. For that is what the world needs, people who have come alive. There's a different set of ideas that become available to you when you ask what's wrong and what needs to be fixed than what comes available to you when you ask what's possible. And if you limit your choices in life to the answers that come to you when you ask what's wrong or what needs to be fixed, you'll constrain your potential, because everything that's possible is not born out of a reaction to what's wrong. Some of our greatest innovations have not come from like feeling unsatisfied with the way things are, but from just being obsessed with what's different, what's cool, what's another way to do it. And I think this is a timely message because now, more than ever in my lifetime, you have so many people who have their jobs have been taken away from them, unfortunately, right? Or, you know, and now their sense of purpose, their sense of everyday meaning is really, it's kind of hanging in the balance. And you have a lot of people who feel like, well, if I'm not on the medical front lines, if I'm not the dude that's trying to come up with a vaccination, or if I'm not a politician who's affecting legislation, then I'm just somebody that's kind of sitting at home living this meaningless life, or I can't really make a difference because I'm not one of the few people, you know, who has something to offer that's relevant. And one of the things that I like to say is your creativity is an essential service. And this idea that my life and my actions don't matter because I'm not on the medical front lines, it's based on the fallacy that what the world needs is exclusively limited to efforts that are aimed at solving what society deems to be the most urgent problem right now. But that's not where innovation comes from. Useful solutions come from that, but innovations don't come from that. You know, take for instance, all of the interesting political discourse that, and all of the forms of accountability and all the crimes that have been solved as the result of a camera phone. Right? But there was no committee that gathered together and said, hey, let's, what are some ways we can solve more crime? What are some ways that we can improve the quality of political discourse? Oh, I know, let's create a mobile device. And then over time, you know, we'll introduce this terrible quality camera that everyone will criticize, and then we'll gradually improve it year by year, and it will become so good. Oh, yes, yes. And at the same time, some other entrepreneurs over here will create this thing called YouTube where anybody can upload their videos, and then these things will magically come together and political discourse will be forever changed. No one did that, right? Someone came up with this idea for reasons that had nothing to do with solving the most urgent problem at their time, because they weren't asking what's wrong. They were asking what's cool, what's possible, what's interesting. Everybody's satisfied with the way that we do phone calls right now, but what's another way we can do it? What's a different way we can do it? You know, Henry Ford said that if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have demanded a faster horse. People weren't sitting around riding on horses being like, man, we need to go 120 miles per hour. People weren't sitting around going, man, when are they going to make the buses? In fact, when the automobile was first introduced, contrary to like the romantic accounts of creativity that were often taught, there was great skepticism, because the anytime you have an innovation, it has to prove itself in an environment that is optimized for the very thing that it's disrupting, right? So when you have the automobile, that automobile has to prove itself on roads that are optimized for horses. So horses actually look like they perform better than the automobile. And so people don't go, wow, that's cool, man. Can I get one? People go, what are you doing? That's really dangerous. There were even regulations passed where you had to like warn people that an automobile was coming. You had to have like an engineer with you in order to drive. It was just very uncomfortable and scary, but it revolutionized the world and solved a lot of problems and created a lot of opportunities for people, because it didn't come from a place that limited itself to what's wrong. It came from a place of what's possible. Can I give one more example? I know I've talked a lot.
Sure.
Neil deGrasse Tyson tells a story of how when he was in college, you know, he was studying physics. That's always been a passion of his. And he had a buddy that was really into civil rights. And this buddy was a Rhodes Scholar. He really looked up to him and respected his opinion a lot. And his friend said to him, hey man, don't you think that as a black man, your intelligence, your knowledge would be best used being involved in the civil rights movement, as opposed to like being in physics, something that's so far removed from concerns of social justice? We're not there yet, you know? Like that's kind of like for the privileged who don't have to worry about these kinds of questions, but we're not there yet. We can't afford to be like focusing on theoretical physics. And those words kind of, they created a little bit of a struggle, because this guy was a friend and it was somebody he respected. And so it kind of allowed a little self-doubt to creep in. And, but you know, he did persist in his studies. It was very difficult to abandon it because he loved it so much. But one time he was in his office while he's in grad school, someone from a news station called the school, and he happened to pick up the phone, and they said, you know, I can't even fake the knowledge of science that he had, but when he explained this, but he says that they said there's some kind of phenomenon going on in the sky, and you know, there's been some concerns, lots of people have called in about it, and we wanted to see if anybody knew what that was about. And he says, oh yeah. He goes, there's nothing wrong at all. This is a regular occurrence. What you're observing is this, that, and they explained it scientifically. And they said, would you mind coming down to the station and saying it on TV? And he says, yeah. He had one clean suit. They said they're going to send a car right away. And he had to like get his one clean suit on and put himself together. He goes down to the station. He gets on TV, a black man talking about science. And he says he wasn't there to tell the country that black people are going to be okay. He wasn't there to explain science for black people. He was there to just talk about science and explain what was going on. And after that moment, he's had many people come to him years later and say, that moment that I saw you on TV, I realized something was possible for me. I'm an engineer today because of you. Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'm a physicist because of you. I'm a chemist because of you. I'm a doctor because of you. I came to believe that science was cool because of you. And over the years, he's seen so many people of color go into not only the sciences, but into other fields because of the way he made physics look so cool. And in retrospect, it turns out that he did contribute to the civil rights movement, not by trying directly to contribute to the civil rights movement, but by living out the principle of ask not what the world needs, but rather what makes you come alive, for that is what the world needs, people who have come alive. There are possibilities that are born out of love that simply do not arise out of duty. When you do something because you just feel obligated to do it, you don't love it, you don't care about it, it doesn't keep you awake at night, you just feel guilty for not doing it, then that incentivizes you to just do enough to satisfy the guilt and then to stop. You know, I'll give an example. Has your mom or dad ever made you take out the garbage?
Oh yeah.
Have you ever, when fulfilling their command, have you ever decided, you know what? I'm going to take out the garbage for all of my neighbors too. Have you ever
No,
done that?
not at all. Not at all.
Not at all. Not because you're a bad person. There's actually a very rational reason why. The rational reason is simple. It's you didn't want to take out the garbage in the first place. The only reason you were taking out the garbage was to avoid the negative consequences of disobeying a commandment from an authority figure, right? So the rational thing to do when you're in that situation is to quickly identify how much work needs to be done in order to avoid the negative consequences of not doing it. And you do that, and then it's rational to stop. Why would you persist in doing something that you don't want to do when there are zero negative consequences for avoiding the work? That would be irrational. So the possibilities that are born out of duty are very different than the possibilities that are born out of love. How about, have you ever been in a situation where you had responsibilities, you had stuff that you needed to do, but you stayed on the phone with some girl for 3 hours when you knew you should have wrapped up the conversation in like 30 minutes, right? And you were going to be behind on work, but you're going beyond what you knew was the responsible amount of time. You ever done something like that?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, because that's what love does. When you're infatuated, when you're obsessed, when you're fired up, when something makes you come alive, when you're genuinely intrigued, you don't ask, how much do I have to do? You ask, how much can I get away with doing? You know what I mean? And that kind of spirit is what drives creativity. It's what brings new things out of you. You know, you don't write a cool song for a girl if your mom makes you go out on a date with her. You just do what your mom requires you to do and get it over with. On the other hand, if it's a girl that you like, man, poetry starts coming out of you, music starts coming out of you, and you can't centrally plan that kind of stuff. And so to bring it all back around during times like this, especially, and I say this from a unapologetically spiritual point of view, we cannot allow ourselves to be deceived into believing that God's purposes are less powerful than a global pandemic. We cannot allow ourselves to believe that the creative spirit that is inherent in our humanity is somehow compromised by a crisis, that whatever it is you are called to do doesn't matter anymore because there are some things that go wrong in the world. The problems of our world are not an argument for creativity. They're the very reason for why we need it in the first place. And
Mm.
whatever you are called to do, whatever you are curious about, whatever you are intrigued by, that's the stuff you need to be dedicated to. And you got to stop beating yourself up for not being the person that's going to come up with some cure for the virus. And you got to value what you've been called to do, because even if it's not obvious, there is an invisible hand that guides our actions. It's not up to you to do it because you have some guarantee that it's going to turn into a miracle. It's up for you to do it because you owe it to yourself and others to do what your nature demands of you. That's where I was coming from with that. I'm sorry, man. I'm just going on so many long rants, bro.
No, this is great, and I think that it's what we need to hear. What you're saying. It's one of the reasons I wanted to interview you, because every time we talk, I feel inspired,
Likewise,
um,
though. Likewise.
and I wanted my audience, our audience, uh, to also be inspired, especially given the crisis that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Um, well, I'm going to put some links in the description of various ways that folks can interact with you and your content. And I just want to say again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your well thought out, responses to my questions. Thanks for being honest. You know, I think I think it's easy to sort of not be as uh, generous as you've been. And, I look forward to us interacting again soon. Uh, you know, let me know if I can be of service to you.
Yeah, man. Let's do it again, man. I mean, I miss talking to you. Um, I remember back in the day just having long conversations with you, and they weren't just interesting or fun, but they were formative. You've
Oh,
had
yeah.
a considerable impact on my life, an unparalleled impact. I mean, I've learned just so much from you, from our days of arguing together, from our days of asking you questions. I even remember an experience where there was this guy who was just like trying to argue with you. And I just remember physically the way you were holding your body, the way you were nodding when the guy was talking. You disagreed with everything this guy said. And as soon as you started talking, it was clear that you thought he was wrong about everything. But the whole time that he was talking, you were making eye contact, you were nodding your head, you were calm. Your breathing was like you were playing the sax, you were breathing well. And you just made that guy so comfortable, and you created a space where that dude could express a philosophy that you completely rejected, but yet feel like he was heard and seen and felt like he was respected. And then the way you expressed your disagreement was just so humane. And I always remember that moment. And that's something that I take with me. And I feel like that may be one of the smallest things, man. Yeah, I mean, you've had a huge impact on me, bro. Like it will take a whole episode to just tell stories and talk about that.
Well, I'll definitely have you back too, uh, uh, so we can discuss some more of these stories. I mean, I I haven't even mentioned the spiritual transformation that I underwent, largely because of some material that you introduced me to, and but that'll be a teaser for for the future. All right, God bless you, man, and I'll see you later. Be safe.
Peace out, man. Hey, bro, keep that record button on, because I'm gonna be the obnoxious guest that's gonna ask, can I share a final thing?
Sure, go ahead.
Yep. I won't be long on this, but my wife and I have been talking about this a lot lately. She's rereading the Diary of Anne Frank, and something that I think this book in particular offers some really awesome wisdom for our times, and I recommend anyone read it if you've got some time to get into some reading during the quarantine. But Anne Frank, along with like 6, 7 other people, they lived in hiding. They didn't live in wonderful accommodations. They lived in hiding, knowing that any sound they make could be the very sound that could cost them their lives. There was a backdrop of the possibility of death at all times. It was much worse than it is now, where you can go for a walk, or you can at least go out on your front lawn or something like that without being worried about being arrested and killed, or put in a camp. But even in the midst of all of that, one of the things that they did in order to maintain a sense of meaning was they made sure that they celebrated and commemorated the moments of life. When there was a birthday, they didn't say, hey, we can't go to the grocery store to get a cake. We can't be loud and have music. So for the sake of staying alive, we're going to hit the pause button on a birthday. They had the courage to light a candle during the Holocaust. They had the courage and the creativity to find a way to celebrate birthdays, even during the Holocaust. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that you can do when you're going through hard times, is you can fight for your right to bring meaning to your day. The easiest thing that we can do right now is to hit the pause button on meaningful activity, on structure, on discipline, on productivity, and say, well, we can't do anything until this stuff gets worked out and we get our jobs back. We can't afford to do that, not because of some moral position, but because of an anthropological position. To be human is to create. It is an essential feature of who we are. And when we cease to create, we degrade our own humanity. So fight for your right to create in whatever you do. Manufacture your own meaning, and don't rely on external conditions to give us permission to do that.
And on that final thought, thank you.
Thank you,
Have a
brother.
good one, man.
You too, bro.